Hey, thanks for being here. We are grateful that you decided to join us as Rich and I have conversations about what it means to become ourselves. Enjoy.
Um, that's it, really. I think the other thing was just me asking, like, does this feel like, like worthwhile? Like, like I know that this is something that I want to do, and I don't think it's something that you don't want to do, but you're kind of just like, nah, I think you have a good idea, and I'll help, however. But I guess the question is, do you feel like this is important? Like, do you see this being important? Important enough to take the time out to set up and this and that? Or it's kind of like, it's not that important. It doesn't feel like it's going to have that much of an impact. If it does, on what levels do you think? I guess I'm just trying to get a sense of, like, what I said earlier. I'm like, damn, like, this just feels like, am I not supposed to do this? Like, why are there so many challenges to, like, put this together? Have I made this more complicated than it needs to? I know that I'm kind of, I feel like I'm an artistic perfectionist. Like, I have a vision of how I want to do something, and I want to try to do it that way. Maybe it's a lot more complicated, my vision or my way of doing it. I'm just trying to make sense of, like, all the challenges. And I guess a part of that is like, yo, is this even important to do this, to have these conversations, for it to be me and you? Just let someone else do this. Like, there are plenty of podcasts trying to do this, or maybe there aren't.
I mean, yes and no. Yes, in that there are no shortage of podcasts out there in this day and age. And with the new year, there are many more that have started. I can't imagine how many people got podcast things for Christmas. So, yes, in that there are lots of people doing this. No, in that there is no other you and me that's doing this.
Yeah.
So that's the thing that I tell myself, because I rarely am like, not even rare. Yeah, I'm not public with my voice or like thoughts or anything like that. So, yeah, there's not another you and me. So for anybody that wants to hear this, they will. And for anybody that doesn't, they don't. And that's okay. But that doesn't determine the important. None of that, not even the challenges, get to determine or put a value on this thing's importance. You know what I mean?
I do.
There are challenges, largely in part because you've never done this before, right? That could be something. That could just be, as I'm just a very logical thinker.
Yeah.
It could just be the practicality of, oh, we've never done this before. Like, just the actual practical skills that it takes to do something like this, right? Someone is going to learn by doing sometimes, and by experience, and by mistakes. So I just tack it onto that, right? Like, I really do. I don't think that there is a larger force that's at work trying to thwart this. Maybe a little bit. Maybe there is a, like, oh, maybe this would be really helpful for someone. And, like, yes, there is like a dark force that's trying to prevent this, like, from getting somewhere. But there's a part of me that's like, I don't think I want to give that much credit to something else. But that's just me. There is a learning curve. And with a learning curve, there's like a patience curve or whatever that comes with it. So to answer your question, I do think that this is important. For the reasons of, one, just talking to you. Like, I like having conversations with you. about things. I like these types of conversations because it allows us to be more curious about one another and like learn more about one another. So that's also really good, and like in that type of setting. And I feel like when it comes to the parenting aspect, I feel like there are a lot of voices. I mean, do people still blog? I don't even know. But like but you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
voices, influencers, any of that. Like there's a lot of that, like for when it comes to like young kids, like little kids.
Yeah.
But for some reason, like it all falls off. Like the voices really drop off. Like when you get
Yeah.
into like double digit teenage years, and I'm not really sure why. Like have people lost steam? Are people in like the boat like that you and I find ourselves in sometimes? Like I don't even know what to freaking do. Like so I don't have much to like offer. And so I think that our voices could be helpful in just talking about our experiences raising kids in double digit years, because I would like to have that type of resource even now. But even in as much as we've learned, I think that also is helpful in like the many times that we talk to our friends, right? Like whether they have kids around the same age or kids that are younger. So yes, I think this is helpful or important.
Yeah, important and helpful. Just one note as I keep can you just move the plant more toward this side?
I don't like the way this mic is right now, as you can tell from me having wanted to move it. But there's probably nothing I can do at this point. Probably should mute that.
Yeah. Let me mute it. What do you need me to do to the mic? I can.
No, all I wanted was like to be further. Maybe that's good.
Yeah, but it kind of needs to be close so that it can pick up your voice, no?
Isn't there like something you can do that it'll pick it up even if it's like further? No? Or I have to really be like this?
No, you don't have to be like that. That's fine.
Is this
Just
okay?
as long as it's facing you.
Yeah. Is this obstructing my face or?
No, it's not obstructing your face. You're fine. Well, you said something. Let me sit down before I say. Well, you said something. My back?
Mm-hmm.
You said something in our last conversation that I thought was helpful, or in a few conversations ago where you talked about parenting, you know, and some of the things that we're trying to process and how we're trying to like parent our kids, particularly our teenager. And you said we didn't really have a spelled out philosophy or method, in large part because you felt as though our parenting was going to simply be an extension of the way that we engaged with one another. Right?
Yeah. None of that was planned, I would say. I
None
think,
of what was planned.
like, oh, we're just going to parent them how we treat each other. I think we were just figuring things out along the way.
Of course, yeah. I don't think it was planned either.
No.
But I guess even as you say that, I'm starting to wonder if the best approach to new things, especially something as important as parenting or being responsible for another human being, whether you're parenting your own child, an adopted child, whether you've become responsible for someone else, you know, an elderly parent or someone,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, I'm starting to believe that it is far more important to have a certain disposition and attitude than to have a plan,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right? Because plans, and I know this is a blanketed statement, I know this isn't true, absolutely true, but it is generally true that plans account for scenarios, right? Like certain specific scenarios. If things go left, here's the plan on what to do when things go left. If things go right, here's the plan on what to do if things go
Mhm.
right, as elaborate or unelaborate. But they kind of take into account specific scenarios, which I think seems a little dangerous, especially when it comes to parenting, because there aren't enough plans to account for all the different scenarios that you can find yourself in as a parent, especially as they start to grow up and make their own
Plans.
plans and their own decisions,
Yeah.
where they're not, consulting you.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen it far more beneficial to have a kind of disposition, an attitude, or a mindset
Mm-hmm.
to kind of like guard the
Mhm.
different scenarios. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? So to your point, like, I don't even think that was planned. I'm like, it definitely wasn't planned. We did not have a plan. If we had a plan, the only plan was to have a certain kind of disposition and attitude about these new people that we were going to become responsible for raising, caring, feeding, resourcing, so that one day, as we get closer to that day with our teenager, they go out into the world a fully thoughtful, creative, compassionate, loving, forgiving, faithful human, just human being.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought it was good nonetheless. What you said that day about it's just an extension. And it makes me think, going back to this question that I asked, is this even important? Like, we're just having conversations as we often do. There's nothing necessarily produced about what we're talking about. We do have cameras. There are microphones here. But we are just extending what we think happens in our house.
Yeah, there's no script.
There's no script. Yeah, maybe that drives you crazy,
Mm-hmm.
right?
I mean, the cameras and the microphones also.
The camera and the microphones phones also. But the reason why I ask is because I've had so many challenges to like seeing this. And I thought it was helpful to hear you say, yo, this is new. These are just the challenges of you doing new things.
Yeah.
I didn't have that perspective. I didn't think about that.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't thinking about that. I didn't want to think about that because I'm like, it just needs to work. Like, why is this,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But
funny enough, and ironically enough, so much of the challenges and trying to figure it out and even hearing your perspective and engaging in this kind of conversation reminds me of kind of the North Star. We have, I won't say that we don't have some plan for what we want this to be, but we have a disposition. We have a North Star, right? That these are meant to be conversations between you and I about how we've navigated life together as individuals, within our community, as parents, and realizing there's some things that I've learned, but there's so much that I am learning, that I am discovering with every conversation, whether it's a conversation with myself in my journal, or whether it's a conversation with my spouse at home, or whether it's a conversation with my kids or my community or whomever we count as important, family, that with every conversation, I'm learning something about myself, and I'm learning something about how I am meant to show up in the world And I'm learning something deeply important about the way that I believe God has made me, right? These are, with every conversations, I'm reaching a new level of clarity. I'm crossing a threshold, with every conversation, because we deeply believe that in this journey of life, alongside the people that we love, we are becoming ourselves. And I didn't take that into account, as I struggled through, trying to produce this, you know what I mean? But your perspective is helpful. And I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think what you said is really key, just like disposition. I mean, and that is in parenting, in relationships, in your work. It is super important to like keep that in mind. So I think that that's really valuable. Not so much even like a stance or an idea, but a disposition. That's not to say, right, that you don't have like particular like thoughts or plans or anything like that. But yeah, I think that that's really important. The disposition will kind of like steady, like, balance things.
What's the disposition? Like, if you had to give language to it, as we've mentioned it already, like, what's the disposition that you're saying? We're going to navigate some tricky waters. We have navigated some tricky waters in our marriage, in our parenting, in our relationships. But this disposition helps us to walk on water, because so to speak. To walk on water, so to speak, or soar to speak, soar to speak. So to speak. I'm just kidding. I know what it is. It's so to speak. But yeah, well, if you had to give language to that disposition, what is that disposition that you think is helpful?
I will say, when you were mentioning it before, something that immediately came up to me as it relates to parenting. I don't know if I necessarily can think of something. Like, I don't know. Maybe it'll come to me later. But like, is there one disposition? I mean, for me, the way I like to believe I operate, for me, the one disposition that guides my life is grace. I really do believe that.
Yeah.
Grace and patience is, I think, a disposition that I'd like to believe that's like who I am and what I'd like to be remembered as being. But what comes to mind when it comes to parenting specifically, and this isn't something that I feel like I got at the beginning, that it was just like a key thing that I got right at the beginning and it's guided me along the way. But I think throughout the years, it has come to me. And my faith plays a really big part in it, in that the disposition that I have and the philosophy I believe that I live when it comes to parenting is the belief that my kids are like not mine. And I feel like, and that sounds like really backwards, but I think it helps me. It helps me in a lot of ways. And what I mean by they're not really mine is that they're God's kids first.
Yeah.
Just in the way that God decided, that I believe God decided that Josiah and Hayden would be our kids. And like that was his design and his plan. I think about it like, I've mentioned this before to you, like when you babysit someone else's kids, right? Someone entrusts you with their kids and you do your, like, you go above and beyond for those kids, to care for them, to feed them, to play with them, to like show them that you are like really there and care for them, so that when the parents come back at the end of whatever time it is, you have this sense of like joy and pride of like, oh, you're back. Here's your kid. Here is like all that we did during the time that you entrusted me with them. Yeah. And you ideally, right, would name all of the ways that you love them and you love them well. Oh my gosh, we had these snacks. After that, we played really well. We did this and this and this and this. Here you go. Here is your child, right? And the parent beams with pride and love in the ways that you loved on their kid, right? I really do take that. Like, I take that little analogy to heart in my own personal life and parenting. Like, I've internalized that idea so much in that I want my parenting to be like that. I want to live in a way that these are God's kids, because they are, but like these are God's kids. So how do I love them? How do I treat them? How do I speak to them? How do I discipline them? Right? Because there may be times like when you're babysitting someone else's kids, like you're not going to like go all reckless, but you're also going to, for the sake of safety, right, and accountability, you might be like, oh no, probably shouldn't touch, we would like you not to touch this, whatever it is that you say.
However comfortable you feel to say it.
So I take that in my parenting because one day I will also have to answer for, this responsibility. Like how I loved my kids, how I spoke to them, like when they got on my nerves or messed up, or like when I got super angry about something, like what were those moments and how did I act? That is the disposition I show up in. So that's like one thing, but I also think about it helps remove any type of possessiveness and idolatry that I also feel like I can possess when it comes to my kids. So possessiveness in that, no, these are my kids. I will raise them however I please. If I want to yell at them, I'll yell at them. If I want to like throw something at them, I'll throw something at, like just anything, because they are mine. Like the possessiveness breeds entitlement, which can be very dangerous, right? Like because it is guided by how I feel, my rules, my feelings or whatever, right? So it helps guard me against that. But then idolatry. There have been moments where I just, in my own thoughts to myself, I think, if anything ever happened to Josiah, or if anything ever happened to Hayden, that they were like taken from me, right? I think I would die. Or like, I think I don't know what would happen to me, right? Like, I think about the worst possible thing that could happen where they were no longer mine. And I feel like my world would shatter and I could go on no longer living. And that's very scary because it's just, it's a scary thought for a parent, but
it's a scary thought in general. Anybody could be terrified of that.
Yeah.
And I think it's also understandable too.
It is.
I
think what I'm trying to say is like, there's a sense of idolatry that I think I can sometimes have where my whole world is could potentially be wrapped up in them.
Yeah.
And so again, taking a step back and like viewing them as like, yeah, they're my kids. But they're also like God's kids. And so that is the disposition that I also feel like I function out of, and that just really helps me.
Stewardship, right? It's what I heard a lot of stewardship. Like, I am responsible for the care, growth, transformation of this human being that has been given to me for for the purpose of stewardship, right? And when you talk about idolatry, I think you said it really well. Like when I build my world, meaning all of who I am, my identity around this thing, in this case, our children, I feel like I'm doing a disservice. Man, you said so many things that were actually really helpful. I think
I would say that if that disposition has been ever present and even more helpful now, as they're older, teenage years, that has just been really helpful to me. Because, to your point, right? Like making their own decisions sometimes, making decisions that are just dumb or just, like,
Poor
like-
decisions.
yeah, just poor decisions that you just want to like shake them sometimes. And that has helped just level set me of like, okay. Before you lose it, just remember, right? And that helps bring me back, and it helps me just enter it with like more questions than wrath.
More questions than wrath. That's really good. Actually, that's really good. It's good because it makes me think of kind of an unspoken value, and I think this is the benefit of us of conversations like these, because things haven't been codified. Like we don't have codes of living, but we do. We just haven't codified them. You know what I mean? Like they're not like, we don't have them written out and printed and put on a
Sure.
frame.
In this family, we
Right. We don't, I mean, gosh, I feel like we're so far from, like, we are the type that is so far from that for like other reasons. But we do have codes,
yeah.
right? Like we do have kind of unspoken codes. And what you just said, your disposition to see your kids as your opportunity to be a good steward. God has granted you this beautiful gift that you get to enjoy, that gives you a healthy sense of self too. Because I think you don't want to build your world around your kids, but you also don't want to build your world without your kids.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there is a way to not make your children the center of your world, but to make them part of your world, and thus like a healthy part of how you understand yourself. You are a mother. You can't escape that. I am a father. I can't escape that. And that responsibility to steward that relationship is what encourages you to give your kids more question and curiosity rather than wrath when they make a mistake or when they make poor decisions. And that, I think, speaks to a kind of code that we live by as a family, right? Being this, like if I had to give language to this code that I felt like you just mentioned, it's we seldom punish our kids when they are honest about their mistakes, because we don't want them to associate confession with wrath.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
We want them to associate understanding and support with confession.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree with that? Like, would you agree that
I
that's
would.
kind of a way that we live? Like, think about the time. I mean, I've got stories. I don't want to share them here because I didn't ask him for permission to share them. But
Yeah.
I have plenty of stories when Josiah has shared with me or confessed to me something that he did, a poor decision that he made.
Mm-hmm.
That, as we said in a previous conversation, as the older they get, the heavier these consequences feel like they get.
Yeah.
Plenty of conversations where he has confessed something deeply, deeply scary. And I've tried my best to meet him, not with like, yo, how could you just, how many times do I got to tell you not to do it and blah, 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 and this and that and this situation and that situation, but rather to try to meet him with like, okay, let's talk about this. And even so much as how it shows in my face, right? Like, I could be understanding and supportive, but my face could be giving him mad wrath,
Yeah.
right? And I grew up in a home where the face was crazy. You know, the face my
Your
mom
face,
used to make.
yes. And also your face be doing it.
Well, I'm trying, I'm learning. But can you agree that that feels like an unspoken code in our parenting? Like we want our kids to associate confession, honest confession, with understanding and support, not wrath, not judgment.
Yes.
What would you say?
I would agree with that. I would agree that yes, in moments like that, especially when the stakes do feel really high, and
Oh my
that
gosh, yeah.
the response really could be a turning point in, you know, I could really like mess this up, or I could really create a memorable moment, like
That's right. Yeah.
and memorable, yeah, in
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
like,
What do you mean by memorable?
yeah, memorable, not like a Hallmark moment, but a moment that potentially could stick for him or her. It's like, man, I said this really wild thing and he didn't blow up in my face, or she didn't just make me feel like an idiot. Like, so, and then
Yeah.
just like that moment and that feeling
I agree.
influences the
agree.
confession for the next time around.
I agree.
But what I was going to say is, yes, I would agree with that there is an element of pause, questions, understandings, but even the space for us to communicate maybe how, like, you know, just for our own honesty, to cultivate a healthy perspective of confession, what confession is meant to do. The only thing
That's
I would
good,
add to that
Yeah.
is,
That's really good. What confession is meant to do.
yeah,
I want to come back to that.
the only thing I would just annex to that is that, you know what it is? I just think that in times we've just gotten the order of events wrong. Like, we, parents, whatever, like in the sense of there's a confession or there's like this revelation of something, and then the punishment is like the next thing, right? Again, the order is wrong. The formula's messed up. I never want to confess again. However, there are times that there just are consequences for those things. Like, that's not to say like something may have happened and, oh, we had a good heartfelt moment, and then it's like an episode of like a 90s family sitcom that you play the music in the background and everything's fine. Like the saxophone goes off and everything's fine.
The brass instrument, yeah.
But the order and the formula we've gotten wrong for a long
I
time.
see what you're
In
saying. I
that,
follow.
confession, receiving, questions, just guidance, and then the consequence or the accountability comes, but it is the byproduct of love. Like that is part of it, where it's like, you know, I can't think of an example right now, but it's just like, there may be a consequence, but that's only because we're accountable to one another. And I want you to understand, like, that maybe you did this one thing. It was a very unsafe decision on your part. You know, the consequence is you're not leaving the house for 2 months or something like that.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if I would have done that right at the beginning, forget it. You're never going to confess again. But after the conversation of saying why your safety was at risk, so, you know, all of these things.
Other people's safety were
other
at
people's
risk for
safety
that
were at
decision,
risk.
yeah.
I love you too much, right? You know what? And this is, you know, like, you know, it's maybe this is not an unrealistic thing, but like 2 months grounded.
Right.
I think putting it in that way and in like that general order is like, it leaves more room for understanding, because I'm not this, just because I said so, but there's room to receive, to ask questions, to leave room for like understanding. But then I also get to say my piece. I also get to tell you, like, you know, communicate whatever I may be feeling, any wisdom, any insight.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is so helpful. You said this approach you've learned or are learning is helping our kids understand the truer purpose of confession.
Mm-hmm.
And then you talked about the sequence of events,
Mhm.
right? The sequence of how we respond to confession as parents. And what you're advocating for is the sequence should reflect that what you want most is like relational understanding.
Yeah.
That's what you want most.
Yes.
And the sequence of how we respond to a confession from our kids should reflect that. And what you're advocating for is don't lead with the harsh judgment
Mm-hmm.
or with the consequence, right? And sometimes that's kind of out of our control, depending on what,
Sure.
you know, what
Yeah.
they decide or what they do. But when it is in our control, don't lead with the consequence, because then it kind of closes the door on the relational equity that you're trying to build with the child,
Yeah.
right? Or with the teen. Because if you lead with consequences or the harsh judgment, they're like, yeah, that's the last time and we've done this before. Like, we have not led with understanding and questioning. We've led with harsh judgment at times. And it's also happened to us as kids. I mean, I'll speak for myself. Like, it was norm. It was the norm in most cases for my parents to lead with, "Tú estás loco, muchacho. No me sale de la casa por 2 meses." You know, like, you won't leave the house for 2 months. They led with that.
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think if I ever confessed anything.
Well, it usually wasn't a confession for me. It was usually a discovery for
There
them.
it
Like,
is.
they found out in one way or another. And they led with the harsh judgment. So we know what it feels like. And this happens to us as adult. Like, you say something or you confess something, and the person across from you that you're being safe with, or that you're being honest with, doesn't feel safe because they make a face or they abandon you. You don't hear from them after you confess this really dark thing or this really ugly thing.
Yeah.
And they were like very like, you know, attentive and listening, but then you don't hear from them for like another month. That is the same as leading with the consequence. Because the consequence is, you confess this really ugly thing, I don't want to be around you.
Yeah.
And it confirms what you
May have felt.
felt, which made your confession, which made you sharing, made you feel reluctant. I'm like, I don't want to share. They're going to leave me, but let me press through. You share it. They're like understanding, but then you don't hear from them for a month.
The cycle of confession can be hard.
Confession is incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
As a parent, I love what you're saying, because the purpose of confession is deeper connection.
Mm-hmm.
Because the thing that you're confessing is wedged between you and intimacy, you and the intimacy of the person that you are being secretive with, or, you know, about, right?
Yeah.
So when you confess, you're hoping that you have removed the wedge and can now feel closer. That's why we encourage confession, because we believe that that's what it's, the purpose of it, to your point. And, gosh, I was going somewhere with that. I was going to ask you another question, but I went on so many rabbit trails.
Well, I would say, like, the purpose is super important. Because I think about any relationships, the purpose is important. Like, you have to, because this idea of like confession and like not rushing to wrath and like sitting and having a conversation, I can imagine like someone may listen to this and be like, are you kidding me? Like, I don't got time for that. Like, this kid is crazy, and
Sure.
that just seems like doing the most. I can get like somebody thinking that. Which is why having an understanding of your purpose is also really important, because maybe it's not even like confession, right? But like, say for the sake of this, like if I'm going into something like a discussion like that, I have to ask myself, what am I trying to get out of this? Oh, my purpose at the end of the day, I don't care what it is that they did. My purpose is at the end of the day that they feel like I am a safe place. They can always come to me, and I'm going to be here for them and down for them no matter what, right? That's my purpose. So then if I have an understanding of that going into that, I'm going to make time and I'm going to leave space.
And you're going to be willing to move at the pace that getting to that destination requires.
Yeah. Another
Yeah, yeah,
example.
yeah.
Say there's like a moment that you and I are just like having a disagreement, or there's like tension, or just things are like off and we're about to get into like a conversation. I have to ask myself at the end of the day, like, what is my purpose in like getting into now this long conversation with you? Like, oh no, my purpose at the end of this is like restoration, or like redemption, like one of those
That's it.
R words, reconciliation, right? Like, that is one of the R words.
Richard. My purpose is Richard.
Richard.
Right?
No.
No, I'm just saying.
So
Wrong. That's a W.
that's my purpose.
Yeah, yeah.
So if I'm going into that knowing, okay, no. At the end of the day, I'm really just trying to get back into right relationship. I'm not going to see myself as like me against you. It's you and me against whatever this thing is that's wedged between us. So that's just going to guide how I'm entering this. Again, you can put that in any relationship, in any circumstance. Purpose is just
Right. And you know, I will say, I've seen how that philosophy has paid dividends with our kids.
Yeah, 100%.
Because there are plenty of times. I'll give one example. This is somewhat of a mild one. If he says he doesn't want this to be on the thing, I'll take it off. But I think it's mild enough where he won't have a problem. But a few weeks ago, there was a party he wanted to go to. And for reasons that I won't mention here, we decided no. And we explained to him why we were saying no.
Mm-hmm.
We had concerns about what him not going to this party could potentially do socially for him, right? We had our concerns. But in that kind of like tension, he wasn't necessarily confessing anything. So let me just say that right from jump. He wasn't confessing anything. So it's not a one-to-one to what we're talking about. But we did create an open conversation about why. He was very kind of like thrown by the fact that we said, no, we usually let him hang, right? But this time we were very, very stringent about it. No, we're not letting this happen. And here's why. 1, 2, 3. And he was like, but why? And this and that. And then we just created more conversation, and we were honest, and we were open, and we were direct. A few hours pass, party's coming up. We're like, damn, what is this going to do, him and his friends or whatever? We're like processing all that. That's also something worth talking about at some other point. Like, how do we navigate those two things? But what we realized later is that he was very understanding. He was like, look, I get it. Y'all have good reasons not to let me. Although he was living in the consequences of his decisions as to why we said no, because of the open, honest, very direct conversation that we had with him, it created what I think was the purpose of that kind of communication, which I think confession falls under. Confession is a matter of communication.
Yeah.
And that what it produced was understanding. Like, right relationship. Like, yo, you understand, right? Like, we're on the same page. You may not like it, but you understand. Now, there is nothing necessarily wedged between us as parents and you as child, because we decided to lead with open, honest, thoughtful communication, even while you were living into the consequences of the previous decisions that you had made, which are now not allowing you to be part of going to this party.
Yeah.
And that's just one example. I feel like there are many examples with both of them on how, like I mentioned earlier, him sharing some things with me. And it was so interesting he had shared this thing with me, and you can tell it was heavy for him. It was heavy for him. I didn't think it was necessarily as heavy for me, but it was heavy for him to let this out, right? And he did. And he was so kind of like attentive to my facial expressions, to my physical presence. Like, you can tell he was going to read my response if I said one word or if I said 0 words. I was going to say something to him by way of how I would react physically to what he said. And I tried my best not to have any face or any reaction, or, you know, not any reaction, but like a negative reaction. We were eating food, and I was eating, kept eating, and I was quiet for a few seconds because I was processing. And then he said, after a few moments of silence, he said, I want to be a person that you both can trust. I sat quiet a bit more. And I told him, I felt very compelled to remind him, I trust you now more than ever. And I helped him to understand that the reason why my trust deepened for him at that moment, and he might have thought, but I don't deserve trust right now, because I just shared with you this thing that I thought was wedged between us. And I didn't think I deserved your trust, right? He might have been thinking that. I mean, surely I would have been.
Yeah.
But he's hearing me now tell him, I trust you now more than ever. And I tried my physicality to show that. Because you were willing to lead with confession. Because you were willing to lead with vulnerability, even if the thing that you were sharing could have painted you in a negative light or in a dark light. You were willing to show yourself. You were willing, you made a conscious decision to not hide in front of the person that you wanted to be intimate with. And I told him, I said, I trust you now more than ever. And I think he was like trying to like sit with that, you know what I mean? And like, I think it messed us both up because, one, I had to find the courage and strength to offer him something that he clearly didn't deserve. And he was trying to process why he was getting this thing, this trust, you know, and
That's really powerful. That's really powerful because I think about there are going to be no shortage of moments in their lives where they're going to get the opposite from others.
That's a really good point.
You know, there may be moments that they just may, you know what, let me just take this step. Let me just take this risk and bear it all with this person. Like that, yeah. And they may be met with the exact opposite, right?
Or with the exact thing that they were scared of.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Just like, the exact opposite of what you offered, right? They may be met with rejection or, you know, any of those things. And for anyone to get something like that over and over again, that just wears away and just hardens you. But if at home, like in your home base, in like your core relationships, that can be something that is just in you, that is a consistent thing. Like that, I feel like it leaves such a lasting impact. It sets them up to be a little bit more empowered, to be a little more self-secure and confident when those moments come. Because then what happens is they can look at those instances, those relationships with people and be like, oh, well, that's not cool. And it's not necessarily about them as much as it is, okay, this is not the type of relationship I want to be a part of.
That's right. Yeah.
Or this is not something that is healthy for my life. So, yeah, no. As opposed to, an insecure person that's just like, oh, is it me?
That's a really good point.
Not worthy to be loved. But if this is something that
That's
they
really
receive
helpful.
at home, which is, it's just work. It's like, I tell people, like, you know, as the kids get older, it just takes so much time and intentionality and investment. But it is so, so worth it. So, so worth it. Because you raise up someone like that feels so secure within themselves, so empowered to walk confidently in who they are and to know who they are, and know who they can be for others. To be able to cultivate that, I feel like is such a gift. And we're just raising up really wonderful people, so that if they come across that, when they do, they will be so secure and won't crumble, you know, at the first and second like form of rejection. And so that response that you offered in that moment, though may have felt like, oh man, that just feels really wild that we had that moment. I'm glad that you did, because those are just like those many moments that just are very memorable, that create just like core memories. Maybe not even a memory, but just like a core feeling. Like if there was like a self-secure or like a self-confidence or self-esteem ring, like it just added another bar to it. And so that's just really great. And then it gives them the opportunity to become more and more like themselves.
It's really good. It's really good.
Yeah.
Conversations like these are so helpful, because in the case of our kids, we're offering them spaces, behaviors, values in a variety of different ways, in a variety of different circumstances, so that they can navigate the world, ask questions about themselves and the world, and ultimately like become themselves. And in the case of us, the parents or the adults, we're having to navigate our own lives and ask questions about where we currently are and where we've currently been, and undo a lot of things as adults. And I think hearing you having conversations like this is, as you said, really helpful, because I feel like we are in the process becoming more of our true selves.
Yeah, and with that, the last thing that I'll say is, you know, last time I said, and we said this at the beginning, like, we have parented. Our parenting has been an extension of how we have related to one another.
Yeah.
That has made its way into how we've parented.
Yep.
And what I feel like is happening is how we are parenting, and parenting teenagers and parenting young adults when that time comes. Like, now that almost feels like is a cycle. Like what we have, the graces that we have experienced, the mountains, the valleys, the tears, the heartaches, the heartbreaks, the joys, all of that, I feel like that, and the more and more we go through that together as a unit and with our kids, now becomes an extension to how we become ourselves in like this preparing for empty nesters. Like, you and I will be relating to one another so differently than before these guys showed up.
That's right.
So I just feel like this season is cultivating the things and birthing the things that will help us to like become ourselves in these next couple of decades. How we relate to our own selves, like how we view ourselves, how we become ourselves, but then how we become ourselves together in the next season of life. So it almost feels like everything that, you know, that we are has invested into this moment. And then all that we have invested through these key decades will now come back and like refresh us and give us renewed energies and so much more wisdom as we become our later selves.
That's really good. That's really good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's great.
Let's do it again. Love you.
Love you.
Says someone's at our front door.
Yo, thank y'all so much for watching. We really hope you enjoyed that. You know, conversations like these are meant to inspire conversations of your own with the people that you love. So, look, until the next time that you're here with us, be sure to stay curious about your own journey. You'll be very surprised to see who's been in there the whole time. Peace.